is James, and I'd like to welcome you to part 5 of my continuing series where I'm sharing about my personal study and practice of Cartomancy with playing cards. At this point in the series, we started talking about all the individual cards in terms of meaning, and in the last video installment, I talked about my associations for the number 3, and then I explained what my meanings were for all the 3 cards. In this video, we're going to pick up right where we left off, so now we're moving from the number 3 and all the 3 cards to the number 4 and all the 4 cards. So in the next segment, I'll be explaining my associations for the number 4, and then I'll be talking about my meanings for each of the 4 cards one by one. The deck that's been assisting me throughout this video series is the Tally-Ho playing cards, specifically number 13 in the series, and that deck was designed by Jackson Robinson of King's Wild Project. And now, without any further ado, let's move on to the next segment and take a closer look at my associations and meanings for the number 4. And here we are with the 4 cards in the deck. And for me, the theme of 4, when it turns up in a reading, involves stability and security. Some other associations that I have for the number 4 are foundation, structure, framework, discipline, hard work, being detail-minded, and I think because of the number 4 itself, I think of the word formation. Some other associations that come to mind are 4 corners of the earth, the symbol of a box or a square, because it has 4 corners and 4 sides, and with that, a rectangle as well. I also think of 4 seasons, 4 walls, 4 wheels, the 4 elements, and for those who might be spiritually minded, I come from a Christian background, so for me, I tend to think of the 4 evangelists, and that would be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And some other things that come to mind regarding the number 4 are things like buildings, again because they have 4 walls, architecture, engineering, planning, blueprints, construction, anything that's solid, concrete, practical, or tangible. I tend to think of the number 4 as giving form to something, and that plays on my word earlier, formation. And so the number 4 can symbolically represent anything with 4 legs, like furniture or animals, and anything with 4 wheels, and that would be some kind of vehicle. So those are my associations for the number 4. And so now let's start taking a look at each of the 4 cards, starting with the 4 of hearts. And here we are with the first of our 4 cards. This is the 4 of hearts. And for me, the first thing that I think of with the 4 of hearts is emotional stability, because the number 4 for me can represent stability. Along those same lines, I also think of emotional security, again, because the 4 for me as a theme can represent security. So with that, the idea of emotional security is summed up as this idea of feeling safe. Now, the 4 of hearts is also a card of marriage, and it is referred to as the marriage bed card. And playing on the bed part of marriage bed, the 4 of hearts can represent sex and sexual relations. For me, because the number 4 can represent the formation of something, this particular card can represent the formation of a partnership, because hearts is the suit that represents relationships and partnerships. And since I talked about the relationship aspect of the 4 of hearts, this card for me can represent intimacy in a relationship. And that's not just the sex or sexual relations aspect of the card. For me, intimacy can represent this idea of people getting closer on an emotional level. So getting closer emotionally. Now, bringing it back to sex and sexual relations, the 4 of hearts can also be about sexual attraction. This card can be a card of infatuation. And then the last thing that I want to say about the Four of Hearts is that this can be entertaining, at home. And so those are my meanings for the Four of Hearts. And so now let's move on to the next four, the Four of Clubs. And here we are with the next four, and that's the Four of Clubs. For me, the first thing that comes to mind when I pull the Four of Clubs is I tend to think of a vehicle because of four wheels. Then I might consider a room, so that's another one of my meanings is a room, because a room has four walls. Now for me, this card can turn up to indicate that there will be a phone call either made or received depending on where it falls in a reading. So it can represent a telephone call. If we go with the idea that clubs for me is a suit that represents work or business, then the Four of Clubs can represent some kind of service. Now because the number four for me can represent formation, I tend to look at this card as the formation of a business, keeping with the work business aspect of clubs. And with that in mind, it can literally represent a foundation, and that would be a business that serves others. Again, keeping with the work and business aspect of the suit of clubs, this card can represent a conference table, and the pun on the table being that it has four legs. Now in terms of business, again, this card can represent construction, building, architecture, and with that, laying a foundation, and that would be like the foundation of a building. Now keeping with the architecture aspects of the card, this card can represent a drawing board, and it can also represent interior design or decoration if you go with the idea of a room and four walls. And then the last thing that I want to say about the Four of Clubs, clubs being the suit of social activity, the Four of Clubs can represent being invited as a guest to dinner. And so those are my meanings and associations for the Four of Clubs. And so now let's move on to the next four, the Four of Diamonds. And now we're at the third four for this video installment of the series, and this is the Four of Diamonds. And so for me, my first go-to meaning of this card is financial stability and security, because I tend to think of money and finances with the suit of diamonds. And keeping with the financial aspects of the card, the Four of Diamonds can represent a bank account, a financial account, a safe deposit box, or a cashier window. And that's all playing on the money and finances aspect of the card. Now the Four of Diamonds can represent an office, and going further with that, it can also represent a desk, going with the idea again with four legs. Now because the four can represent a box, other meanings of this card for me can represent a gift box, a jewelry box, or a cash box. And this would go into the idea that the box would be storing something of value. And again, because diamonds can represent something of value or some sort of material item or possession. And then the last thing that I want to say about the Four of Diamonds is that this card for me can represent a license or a certification or certificate. And so those are my meanings for the Four of Diamonds. And so now let's move on to the last four card, the Four of Spades. And here we are with the last four card for this video. This is the Four of Spades. And so my first go-to meaning of this card when it turns up in a reading is I tend to think of illness, because just as the Four of Hearts, which we talked about earlier, is known as a marriage bed card, this card is known as the sick bed card. And so playing on the illness aspect of the card, the Four of Spades can also represent rest and recovery. Now given that the four in a negative or challenging sense can represent limitation and restriction, and the suit of spades is also known for being the suit of problems, challenges, difficulties, the Four of Spades can represent confinement. Now the Four of Spades can turn up when you're being encouraged to slow things down, and sometimes this can represent being forced to slow down. And playing on that, the Four of Spades can represent moving slowly or cautiously. Now because the Four of Spades can represent illness, Some of my other meanings along those lines can represent exhaustion, a state of dis-ease, or a state of discomfort. Now, because the theme of 4 can represent stability and security, when it's attached to a spade, it can represent insecurity and instability, the very opposite of stability and security. Now, for me, the 4 of spades can turn up to indicate some kind of family interference. Now, remember in the previous video when we talked about the 3s, the 3 of spades was about interference by a third party. But when this card turns up, it can represent family interference. And because the suit of spades can represent aggravations, this card can represent aggravations on all sides. And that would be all sides, like 4 sides. And then the last thing that I want to say about the 4 of spades, playing on the idea of limitation and restriction, this can come up to suggest there's a sense of being fenced in. And so those are my meanings and associations for the 4 of spades. And there you have it. We've talked about the number 4 and what it means in terms of a theme for the 4 cards, and we've looked at each of the 4 cards individually. And that will bring this video installment of our series to a close. I'm James Himm Mitchell, and as I close, I'd like to thank you for sharing space here with me for this installment of our video series, and I invite you to stay tuned for the next video installment where we'll be taking a look at all the 5 cards. So we'll talk about the number 5 in terms of a theme for all the cards, and then we'll explore the cards one by one. So until then, I'm hoping that you have a wonderful day and take care.